So last time we talked about good content for IT conference, how to make it short, how to make it useful for the audience. Now we're going to talk about choosing a tool for UI test automation in 2023. So here begins our tool selection process, round 1. As any other project, this one begins with the requirements. And the requirements from our customers are following: JavaScript stack, as we're expecting our developers to support the test as functionality updates. Second, ability to run tests in parallel. Third, ability to run tests in different browsers. Tools that we are going to compare. According to my research, these tools are much more technologically advanced. So basically, Playwright is a more advanced fork of Puppeteer, and a Cypress is an advanced fork of Mocha.js. Webdriverio is just the JavaScript API for Selenium. Features that we are going to compare are listed tools. First, runners or environment. The loser here is the Cypress. Cypress runs within the browser context. It loads itself within the iframe, so it doesn't have any ability to control the browser window it runs. As soon as we reload page or switch to a new window, which basically we cannot do within the Cypress test. Test fails as it loses browser context. A Playwright creates different browser profiles, not real browser, but creates either WebKit or Chromium or Firefox browser windows with clean browser profiles. So Playwright, as opposed to Cypress, has control over browser window. It can create new tabs, it can switch between tabs, it can go back and forth within the history, much more flexible and much more control over the test behavior. And finally, the webdriverio, well, it's a standard Selenium. Obviously, it controls browser window, it controls everything. It runs through binary, WebDriver binary, which starts a real browser, opposed to what Playwright starts, which is Chromium, WebKit, and Firefox. Now let's talk about the ability to run the tests in different browsers. There again, Cypress loses, as it only can run inside basically Chromium context. Playwright here is able to support 3 different browser engines, which are Firefox, WebKit, and Chromium, though it does not support running tests inside of the real browser that are built on top of those engines. And finally, webdriverio, well, it works with real browsers that are installed on your machines, since as soon as they're compatible with WebDriver binaries. Okay, now we go to parallel execution. Here Cypress loses, as you can run tests only in one thread locally. And you can use Cypress CS paid service to run tests in parallel on Cypress Cloud, though you cannot deploy this solution on your server. So again, it limits the application of that. Second place here is webdriverio, as it doesn't provide you out-of-the-box solution for running tests in parallel locally, but it offers you ability to run tests in parallel using a Selenium grid, which still has to be configured to run locally or remotely. Playwright here, parallel by design, so out of the box without any other configuration, rather than setting up number of parallel threads in local config based on the documentation. It has ability to integrate with Selenium grid. Regarding ability to run tests in parallel, Playwright takes first place here. Regarding mocks and stubs, well, all 3 tools have ability to mock server response. Third-party integration, it's hard to compare those tools, as I didn't test every possible third-party integration, but again, supposedly by the documentation, Playwright has ability to integrate with WebDriver, with WebDriver technology, with Selenium grid. So I'll give it first place. The other 2 tools I will give second place. So speed and stability. So on the third place here we will place webdriverio. It is slow as it starts a real browser. It controls browser behavior and the test flow through several API calls, first calling an API of the WebDriver itself, then calling a browser within WebDriver, and only then and giving the response back the same way it came through. There are options when your WebDriver is not compatible with a browser version you are starting. You have to manually control the compatibility of the versions of the WebDriver you have within the version of the driver of the browser you want to start. There can be bugs inside WebDriver, there can be bugs inside API. Calling WebDriver of the Selenium API can contain bugs. The WebDriver binary can contain bugs. Some features of the WebDriver cannot be compatible with a specific version of the web browser. Second place for the stability and speed I will give to Playwright. Basically, you do not control versions of browser and Playwright versions manually. Inside the release of the Playwright, they have already all compatible versions of a Playwright, an Node.js application, and the browser version that it uses. It is most probably that it is 100% compatible, as asynchronous execution of the test built in again reduces amount of race conditions, flakiness of the tests to the minimum. And third place goes to Cypress. It partly connected to its drawbacks of not being able to run tests inside different browsers or not being able to control browser windows. So as it runs within the same context where the application under test runs, just loads itself within the iframe within the same browser window. Much less of the API calls levels between the tests and the browser and the application. The interaction with the browser itself is excluded here, so the tests communicate directly to the application. Cypress offers you asynchronous flow of the tests built in. This is why Cypress is so loved by JavaScript developers, since you don't really care about cross-browser ability or being able to run tests in parallel or being able to run tests remotely, but once you want to run tests locally, you want to validate your changes have not broken anything. All you need is you need a reliable, clean tool that is able to run fast, that almost reduces flaky tests and race conditions to the minimum because of its asynchronous nature. So these features that are listed here are not equally important. So for my opinion,
speed and stability
probably the most important feature for the test itself. But for our customers, cross-browser ability and parallel execution rated on the first place. So because of that, our winner here was Playwright. The winner of the first round is Playwright. Then we started more extensively testing it, and what we discovered is that Playwright is not compatible with Selenium Grid. So you cannot run tests remotely on the remote machines, and that was crucial to our customers, since the idea was that we would need to start hundreds or thousands of test instances in parallel simultaneously, and so that to handle all this load, we would need to start different instances of the browsers on different remote machines. So the Playwright won initially, but after more extensive testing, we figured out that at the moment the last major version of Playwright doesn't work with Selenium Grid. It did work before, but now it is broken, and it was broken in the past, so it seems like it is not the most stable thing, and it is most crucial for us, as our customer expected to be able to run thousands of tests simultaneously on a remote browser, and so we would have to scale horizontally to add more virtual machines with more browsers to start more tests, as obviously the one machine wouldn't handle all the load, so it would use all the RAM and supposedly crash or hang, not good for the stability. So the requirements has changed, and we got ready for the round 2. So our new requirements, where we were no longer limited to the JavaScript stack. Our main requirement was being able to run tests in parallel, remotely, in a cross-browser manner. And the only solution for that was Selenium. So we started looking available tools on the market that offered integration with Selenium, no matter the language, but additional requirements were following. The tool should contain a library of well-defined custom actions, waiters, loggers, and logging and reporting, and it should not be behavior-driven testing. It should be able to support just regular page object pattern. So basically it should be just a regular tool using Selenium with most of the common actions or common waiters defined so that the test developer would focus on the test. So the tools that we are going to compare is Python plus PyTest, Python plus PyTest plus Selen module, Java plus JUnit plus Serenity framework. Why these tools? This is mostly because of my personal technical stack that I'm working with which I'm familiar with. I'm mostly working with Python and JVM languages. So PyTest is a de facto industrial standard for Python, and a combination of Java plus JUnit plus Serenity was actually suggested by the customer. In terms of runners, they basically use the same technology. They use WebDriver API in terms of runners and environment. There is no better or worse option. It is a little bit easier to run tests in parallel for Python PyTest using plugin xdist. JUnit 5 has some issues with running tests in parallel that are reported in the GitHub. So the combination of Selenium plus PyTest doesn't offer much of the custom waiters and logging except for standard waiters, loggers that already exist in the WebDriver module for Python. Regarding using a Python module of Selen, I was pretty much confused with its custom waiter. This is an example test from GitHub that I looked. So the syntax of the test uses completely different semantics rather than WebDriver API. If you're familiar with Selenium, you will still have to learn from scratch how to write tests using this Selen library. It seems to be defining its own waiter method. So instead of building on top of WebDriver wait methods, it offers you its own waiter that accepts a method result of which we're waiting for. So you can see here finish time, you can see here exception, and this is standard for method. So anything that we're waiting for will use this custom waiter. And well, I do not trust it. I would prefer library that I'm using, though it could define its own semantics, its own helpers, actions, waiters, but on the basic level, I would still want to use Selenium WebDriver native API as much as possible. So that is a red flag for me. Serenity framework offers custom reporting. Serenity framework, it forces better, cleaner page object pattern implementation. So this is what reporting looks like. You can see it has the summary of the whole test run, the same as Allure test reporting. You can go inside of the test results and look at the test run. This is the list of the test. The test failed, marked red. All other tests are marked green. You can go to the successful test, and inside of the successful test, you would see a list of the actions. And if you go to test results, you go into the failed test. Then you would see here an exception. At the end of each action, you would see a screenshot. The code basically looks like this. So this is the test. It contains 2 action calls, 1 page object call, and this page object call is not reflected in the logging. As you can see, the test step is marked by the step annotation, and each step contains a name, a parameterized name, and this name is what you see in the test report. So this is the login page object. So you can define elements using find by annotation. As you see, those methods are made public, so you wouldn't have to expose elements outside of the page object. The level of the test itself, you're only supposed to interact with test steps containing all the page object calls. This seems pretty clean, straightforward, easy to support to me, and this was a tool selection for UI test automation in 2023.